Your sister is a real go-getter, a true professional unlike you, Chloe, my father Arthur declared during our weekly family dinner. He lifted his glass of Merlot, a toast to my younger sister Mia. She doesn't rely on handouts from anyone. I was sitting across the polished mahogany table in our family's Austin, Texas home, feeling the familiar dull thud of his words. It wasn't a sharp pain anymore. After years of this, it was more like a persistent low-grade ache. The candlelight danced across Mia's self-satisfied smirk as she soaked in our father's praise. She looked impeccable, as she always did, her chic silk blouse and minimalist gold jewelry screaming understated wealth. Everything about her was a performance of success. Mia is climbing the ladder with sheer determination, not like your digital hobbies, Arthur went on, his voice thick with a pride he never directed at me. Just look at her condo, her car, her life. She's entirely self-made. I focused on carefully slicing my herb-crusted salmon, my face a practiced mask of neutrality. Years of these Sunday dinners had taught me that silence was my only shield. It was easier than trying to defend myself while Arthur sang Mia's praises and dismissed my life's work as if I were a teenager playing video games in a basement. She's earning real money in corporate fashion, he continued, gesturing with his fork. Not like Chloe, cooped up at home, messing around on that computer all day. Mia preened at the comparison. Thanks, Dad, she said, her voice smooth as silk. I've put in the hours to get where I am. It's an incredible feeling, being totally financially independent. I nearly spit out my Pellegrino. Financially independent? This was the same woman who had called me, sobbing just last Tuesday because she couldn't make her Lexus payment. Excellent, I said, my voice quiet but clear as I set down my silverware. Then I suppose she won't need my $3,500 monthly stipend anymore. The sentence landed in the middle of the room and hung there, a thick, suffocating cloud. Mia's confident smirk vanished, instantly replaced by a wide-eyed, fish-out-of-water panic. Arthur, mid-sip, froze, his eyebrows knitting together in a knot of confusion. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice slow and deliberate. "I said, Mia won't be needing my monthly wire transfers anymore," I repeated, keeping my tone perfectly level, my eyes locked on my sister as the color drained from her face. Mia's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She had spent 2 solid years curating this elaborate fiction of being a corporate powerhouse, all while secretly living on my income. Now her entire carefully constructed world was about to shatter with just a few words. "Chloe, we agreed that was private," Mia whispered, her voice a desperate, strangled thing. "What was private?" Arthur demanded, his gaze flicking between us, a storm of alarm gathering in his eyes. The air in the room felt electric. I could practically see the gears turning in Mia's head as she calculated the fallout. Her entire identity, the golden child, the one Arthur was so proud of, the daughter who didn't need a dime from anyone, was teetering on the edge of a cliff. This was it. This was the moment I hadn't even known I was waiting for. 2 years of being the family disappointment. 2 years of funding a lifestyle I was simultaneously criticized for not having. 2 years of Arthur's relentless belittling. The pedestal was about to crumble, and I was the one who had just kicked it out from under her. My name is Chloe Evans, and I'm 33 years old. For the last 5 years, I've been running a highly successful e-commerce company from a dedicated office in my modest condo in South Austin. While my family pictures me as a perpetual slacker who messes around on that computer, I've quietly built a business called Wild Edge Outfitters. I sell specialized gear for adventure sports, rock climbing, kayaking, backcountry skiing, sourcing high-end equipment from niche manufacturers and selling it through my own website, Amazon, and a few other curated online marketplaces. It started as a passion project, a way to connect with my own love for the outdoors, but it has exploded into something I never imagined. Last year, my gross revenue was just over $800,000. My profit margins are excellent, and I have a fiercely loyal customer base that leaves glowing 5-star reviews. The irony is staggering. While Arthur laments my lack of a real job, I earn more in a slow quarter than he made in his best year as a university professor. But I've never been one to flaunt it. I wear simple clothes, drive a practical Toyota RAV4, and live well below my means. Money for me has always been about freedom, not status. For Mia, however, it's always been about the appearance of status. At 27, she works as an assistant store director at a high-end fashion boutique in the Domain, Austin's luxury shopping district. She makes about $48,000 a year, a perfectly fine salary, but a universe away from the executive-level income Arthur thinks she has. 2 years ago, Mia came to my condo in a full-blown panic. She'd maxed out multiple credit cards trying to project an image of wealth she didn't possess. The rent on her downtown apartment was suffocating her. Her car payments were a joke, and she was drowning in a sea of designer handbags and shoes she'd bought to impress her affluent circle of friends. "I'll pay you back, I swear," she had sobbed, her mascara running down her cheeks. "I just need a little help until I get this big promotion. I can't let Dad know I'm failing." As the older sister, my protective instincts kicked in. I agreed to wire her $3,500 every month to help her cover the deficit, with the firm understanding that it was a temporary bridge. Mia swore she'd use the breathing room to cut back and sort out her finances. Instead, she used my money as a launch pad for an even more fraudulent lifestyle. She upgraded to a more luxurious condo, leased that expensive Lexus, and began curating an Instagram feed that looked like a get-rich-quick influencer's vision board. She spun tales to Hamara family about her meteoric rise in the fashion industry, carefully concealing the fact that I was the silent, uncredited financier of her entire life. All the while, at every family gathering, Arthur would trot out the same old script. He'd laud Mia's supposed independence and work ethic, genuinely convinced her boutique job was more prestigious and lucrative than my sprawling online empire. "Chloe needs to find a real career," he'd tell our relatives. "Mia is the responsible one. She's truly making something of herself." The most bitter pill to swallow was watching Mia nod in agreement, a solemn look on her face, never once defending me or admitting that her success was a house of cards built on my money. She had grown comfortable in the lie, comfortable with me footing the bill for her image while she reaped all the rewards. Tonight's dinner was meant to celebrate Mia's latest fictitious promotion. Instead, it was rapidly becoming the night the whole charade came crashing down. The silence in the dining room stretched on, thick and heavy. Finally, Arthur placed his fork down with a deliberate clink. He stared at me with the same expression he wore when discussing my supposedly aimless life. "Chloe, explain what you mean by a monthly stipend," he said, his voice dangerously low. Mia shot me a look of pure, animalistic fear. "Dad, it's a misunderstanding," she stammered, but her voice was thin and reedy, lacking any conviction. $3,500, I stated, my voice unwavering. "On the first of every month for the last 2 years. That comes to a grand total of $84,000 to cover Mia's rent, car, credit cards, and her rather expensive shopping habit." Arthur's face cycled through a series of emotions: confusion, then stark disbelief, and finally, a deep, simmering anger. That's not possible. Mia earns an excellent salary at her director position. She makes $48,000 a year as an assistant director, I corrected matter-of-factly, which is a respectable income, of course, but it's not nearly enough to fund the life she's been projecting. Chloe, please just stop, Mia whispered, tears now welling up in her eyes. But I was done. I was done protecting her reputation at the expense of my own. Her condo in the Seaholm district costs $3,200 a month. The Lexus lease is another $700. Then you add utilities, insurance, student loans, and the minimum payments on her 5 maxed-out credit cards. And you'll find she's been short about $3,500 every single month, just to maintain this illusion Dad has been celebrating. Arthur slowly turned his gaze to Mia, his expression one of dawning horror. Is any of this true? Mia's flawless makeup began to streak as sobs shook her body. I was going to pay her back. I needed more time to get on my feet. On your feet doing what? Arthur demanded, his voice cracking. You told me you were promoted to a regional manager role 6 months ago. I oversee 2 sales associates, Mia admitted, her voice barely audible. It's not really a regional position. The confession hung in the air, a pathetic admission of the depth of her deceit. For 2 years, Mia had been fabricating a career, inventing promotions and bonuses that existed only in her imagination and in Arthur's proud boasts to his friends and colleagues. So, all this time, while I've been telling everyone how self-made you are, how you're the model of independence, you've been living off your sister's money? Arthur's voice was rising, filled with a pained disbelief. It wasn't a handout, Mia protested weakly. It was a loan. A loan with no contract, no interest, and no repayment schedule. I clarified, coolly. A loan you conveniently forgot to mention every time you let Dad lecture me about fiscal responsibility using you as the shining example. Arthur swiveled back to me, and for the first time, I saw a look on his face that wasn't disappointment or dismissal. It was something else. It was shame. How much do you actually make with that computer business of yours? He asked, his voice now a quiet rasp. I had never intended to have this conversation, but the moment had arrived. Last fiscal year, my gross revenue was just over $800,000. After all expenses, taxes, and reinvestment, my personal net income was about $450,000. The figure struck my father like a physical blow. He sank back into his chair, just staring at me, as if he were seeing a complete stranger. Mia was now sobbing uncontrollably, the full weight of her exposure crashing down on her. Her secret was out, her image as the golden child utterly annihilated. In the ensuing silence, Arthur's wine glass slipped from his grasp, shattering against the side of his plate. The sharp sound echoed through the dining room as he tried to process what I'd just told him. 800,000, he repeated, his voice a ghost of its usual booming tone. That's gross revenue, I clarified again, wanting him to understand the mechanics of it. My net was $450, but yes. Mia was now hyperventilating, her words tumbling out in a panicked rush. Chloe, you can't stop now. You can't. My rent is due next week. I have credit card bills, my car insurance, my gym membership. Maybe you should have considered that before you spent 2 years letting our father believe you were a better version of me, I replied calmly, pulling out my phone. I'm canceling the automatic transfer as we speak. My fingers flew across the screen of my banking app. It was a muscle memory I had performed every month for her, but this time it was to delete. With a few taps, the recurring $3,500 transfer that had fueled Mia's fantasy life was gone. There, I said, holding up the screen to show her the confirmation. Cancelled. My father stared at me as if I'd just sprouted wings. You make more in a year than I made in a decade as a tenured professor, and you've been letting me go on, lecturing you about getting a real job. You never asked what I made, Dad, I pointed out gently. You just assumed that because I work from home in jeans and a t-shirt, I must be failing. Mia abruptly stood, her chair screeching against the floor. Dad, you have to make her help me. I'll be homeless. Sit down, Mia, Arthur snapped, his voice sharp and cutting through her hysteria. You have been lying to my face for 2 years. I wasn't lying, not exactly, she pleaded. I was managing perceptions. Managing perceptions? Arthur's voice dripped with a newfound disgust. You told me at Christmas you received a $20,000 bonus for exceeding your sales targets. Mia's face crumpled. I knew you'd be disappointed if I told you I was struggling. So instead, you let me treat Chloe like she was the family failure, while she was literally paying your rent? Arthur pushed himself to his feet, his own chair scraping the floor. Do you have any idea how many people I've told to look at you as a model of success? How many times I've told the story of my brilliant self-made daughter, Mia, as an example of what Chloe should be? The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. The entire time he held up Mia as his beacon of success, she was entirely dependent on the daughter he dismissed. Every designer piece he'd admired, every lavish trip he'd praised, every accomplishment he'd celebrated, all of it had been bought and paid for by my supposedly worthless digital hobby. Chloe, I need you to reconsider, Mia begged, circling the table to stand in front of me. I'll pay it all back. With interest. I'll sell the car, I'll get a second job, I'll do anything. What I want, I said, rising to meet her gaze, is for you to stop pretending. What I want is for Dad to stop using your fake success as a benchmark for my failure. What I want is for us to finally have some honesty in this family. Mia's perfect mask was completely gone. Her expensive makeup was a ruin of streaks and smudges, and her silk blouse was creased and limp. For the first time in years, she just looked like what she was, a 27-year-old woman in over her head. But Dad thinks I'm a success, she whispered, the last pathetic defense. Dad thought you were a success, I corrected her. Now he knows the truth. Arthur was pacing the length of the dining room, running his hands through his salt and pepper hair. 2 years, he kept muttering to himself. 2 years of bragging about Mia's corporate career while writing off Chloe's business as a joke. It's not a joke when it pays better than the C-suite at most companies, I said, my voice quiet but firm. He stopped pacing and looked at me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine respect in his eyes. What exactly is it that you sell? Adventure sports equipment, I replied. High-performance gear for climbing, kayaking, backcountry skiing. I partner with niche manufacturers, create my own brand identity, and distribute through multiple online channels. My core customers are serious enthusiasts who want pro-level quality without the brand name markup. Arthur blinked, processing. And this generates $800,000 a year. It varies, I said, but it's consistently profitable, yes. Mia was still sobbing, but her tears had changed. It wasn't just panic anymore. It was the sound of real grief for the collapse of her carefully constructed world. I need to understand the specifics of your business, Arthur said, returning to his chair with a new, focused intensity. I want to know exactly what it is I've been so ignorantly dismissing. Mia looked from me to him, her desperation growing. She was realizing that our father's attention had completely pivoted away from her crisis and onto my success. She was becoming irrelevant in real time. I launched Wild Edge Outfitters 5 years ago, I began, feeling a strange sense of calm. I saw a gap in the market. Most outdoor gear is either cheap stuff that won't survive a single season, or it's overpriced luxury equipment for people who barely use it. Arthur leaned forward, his elbows on the table, actually listening to me for what felt like the first time in my adult life. So I spent a year researching manufacturers. I found suppliers who produce for the big names, but also do white labeling. I designed my own product line that offers the same quality and durability as the premium brands, but at about 60% of the cost. And people, they just buy this from a website? He asked, a genuine question. Dad, the outdoor recreation industry is massive, I explained. It's a multi-billion-dollar market. Most companies focus on either the extreme athletes or the very casual camper. My niche is the dedicated hobbyist, the person who goes out every weekend and needs gear that won't fail them, but doesn't want to pay for a sponsored athlete's marketing budget. Mia was frantically typing on her phone, no doubt staring at her bank balance and realizing the catastrophic cliff she was about to fall off. My average order is around $300, I continued. I fulfill about 1,000 orders a month. My gross margin is roughly 45% after cost of goods, but before marketing and overhead. Arthur was doing the math in his head, his eyes wide. The sheer scale of my operation was finally penetrating the wall of his preconceived notions. He had spent years picturing me as some sort of digital nomad slacker, when in reality, I was running a logistics and marketing machine from my condo. Where do you even do all this work? He asked. My condo has a home office, but the logistics are almost entirely outsourced. I use a third-party fulfillment center near the airport. I manage inventory, supplier relations, digital marketing, customer service, and all the financial strategy. The physical boxes are packed and shipped by a team at a warehouse. Mia suddenly looked up, her face a mask of terror. Chloe, my credit card minimums are almost $2,000 a month. Without your money, I can't even cover those. I'll be ruined. Maybe you shouldn't have bought a $5,000 Chanel bag last month, I suggested coolly. Or maybe you should have been honest about your situation from the start, instead of building a lie that required my constant financial support. But what do I tell everyone? She wailed. The whole world thinks I'm successful. You tell them the truth, Arthur said, his voice like gravel. You tell them you've been living a lie, funded by the sister you and I both treated like a failure. The weight of it all was clearly settling on him. Every lecture he'd ever given me, every word of praise for Mia, every ounce of disappointment he'd ever shown me was now being reevaluated through this new brutal lens. I need to call your Aunt Carol, he said abruptly. Why? Mia asked, her voice filled with dread. Because last week I told her that Chloe needed to follow your example and find a stable career. I told her your retail job was proof that traditional employment was safer and more valuable than entrepreneurship. My Aunt Carol, Arthur's sister, was a self-made real estate mogul who had always championed my business. She had likely bitten her tongue raw listening to my father's misguided lectures. I could only imagine her reaction to this news. Mia was now in a full-blown spiral, her laptop open as she frantically searched for apartments she could actually afford on her meager salary. Look at this, she whimpered, pointing at a listing for a tiny studio. 400 square feet for $1,600 a month. It doesn't even have in-unit laundry. Welcome to living within your means, I replied, feeling not a shred of sympathy. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my home office, watching my business account swell. The $3,500 I used to send to Mia was now being funneled into a targeted marketing campaign to expand Wild Edge Outfitters into the European market, and I was already seeing promising results. Mia, as predicted, had moved into a small, nondescript apartment complex a 30-minute drive from her job. I'd heard through our father that she'd sold her Lexus and most of her designer clothes and bags online to make a dent in her mountain of credit card debt. She was working extra shifts and weekends just to stay afloat. But the most satisfying part wasn't watching Mia's fall from grace. It was witnessing the slow, seismic shift in my father. Arthur had called me every few days since that explosive dinner, asking detailed, intelligent questions about my business. They weren't critical or dismissive questions. They were born of a genuine, desperate desire to understand the world he had so completely misjudged. I told Carol your real revenue numbers, he admitted during one call, his voice heavy with contrition. She laughed at me for about 10 minutes straight. Aunt Carol always knew you were selling me short, I replied, a small smile playing on my lips. She said she tried to tell me, but I was too stubborn to listen, he confessed. She called me an arrogant old fool who wouldn't recognize success unless it wore a suit and tie. That sounded exactly like my aunt. The worst part, Arthur continued, his voice cracking slightly, is trying to remember all the people I bragged to about Mia. All the times I held her up as the responsible one while implying you were a lost cause. And now? I asked. Now I have to figure out how to tell them I was wrong about everything. That the daughter I was criticizing was building an empire, and the daughter I was praising was living in a fantasy I helped enable. The reversal was absolute. His entire worldview had been turned on its head, and he was grappling with the fallout. The most public consequence came from Mia's meticulously curated social media presence. Her Instagram was a monument to a life she wasn't living, filled with photos of her luxury condo, her designer outfits, and her frequent fine dining experiences. Without my funding, that content well dried up overnight. She couldn't afford the lifestyle that was her brand. Her followers, accustomed to daily doses of glamour, started to notice. The comments shifted from, "You're an inspiration," to, "Where have you been? And are you okay? Your posts are different now." The final nail in the coffin came when a former colleague, someone Mia had undoubtedly boasted to, left a public comment. "Hey, heard you got that big regional promotion, but I saw your LinkedIn and it still says assistant director. What's up?" Her digital world, built entirely on my money, became impossible to sustain. She eventually set her accounts to private, disappearing from the online stage she had so desperately courted. Meanwhile, Arthur had started telling people the truth about my business. It was humbling for him, having to walk back years of misguided pronouncements. But he seemed determined to make amends by finally giving me the credit I had earned long ago. "I am so proud of what you've built, Chloe," he told me during one of our calls, his voice thick with emotion. "And I am so deeply ashamed that I couldn't see it when it was right in front of me." Those words, I realized, meant more to me than any sales figure. Mia's return to reality was more brutal than anyone expected. Within 6 months, she was forced to declare bankruptcy. The weight of her debt was simply insurmountable on her salary. The last remnants of her fake life were sold off, leaving her in a Spartan studio with secondhand furniture. Her social circle vanished. The friends who had flocked to her glamorous lifestyle had no interest in a woman struggling to make ends meet. As for me, I reinvested that recovered monthly capital, expanding my business into Canada and then the UK. I realized that Arthur's years of dismissiveness had, in a strange way, been the ultimate motivator. His doubt had been the fuel for my fire, pushing me to build something so undeniably successful that he could no longer ignore it. The real victory wasn't watching Mia's life implode. It was watching my father finally see me. It was him, sitting in my office, asking me to explain supply chain logistics with a look of genuine admiration on his face. I learned that sometimes the most profound revenge isn't about payback. It's about letting the truth shine so brightly that it burns away all the lies that once kept you in the shadows.